Star Wars 7x7, episode 2041. Today we're continuing our series of Clone Wars briefings, preparing you for the release of Season 7 of the Clone Wars. And this time we're talking about the Jedi who knew too much. This is episode 18 from Season 5 of the Clone Wars. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. So here we are, this is Season 5, Episode 18, The Jedi Who Knew Too Much. It's the second in a 4-part story arc, and this particular story arc is also the end of Season 5 of the Clone Wars. This is going to be a full spoiler podcast. We're probably past the point at which you need a spoiler warning. I mean, it's been long enough, right? So we'll skip the whole rigmarole, but you've been warned, okay? So let's dig into it. The things you need to know about this episode are the fact that Letta Turmond, who is the wife of the guy who went to the Jedi Temple with the explosive nanodroids in his body and then blew everybody up, Letta was in Jedi custody but has now been moved to Republic military custody. This does not sit very well with Ahsoka Tano. And meanwhile, Barriss Offee, who is the Padawan of Luminara Unduli, is visibly upset at the funeral that they're having for the fallen Jedi who were killed in the bombing. It turns out she knew one of them very well, so there's a lot of emotional stuff going on. And it's kind of interesting that they have Barriss prominently featured in this. I do recall in Sabotage, there was one moment where I saw Barriss passing in a hallway in a moment where you wouldn't have expected her to be, but it was one of those things where like, oh, are they kind of foreshadowing something here? This is kind of interesting. So anyway, Ahsoka and Barriss are, talking to each other, and then Ahsoka is called into the war room because it turns out Letta wants to speak to Ahsoka, and she is not talking to any of the Republic military people. She only wants to talk to Ahsoka. So Ahsoka goes to visit Letta in the prison, and Letta doesn't want to talk in front of anyone else, so Ahsoka and Letta are left alone in the cell. It's never a good idea. Letta reveals that this was in fact a Jedi plot, that some Jedi believe that they are being turned into weapons in the Clone Wars and are really unhappy about it. They're supposed to be peacekeepers, and so this bombing was a means of calling attention to it and protest and trying to make it so that the Jedi are pulled out of this war entirely. Letta wants to tell Ahsoka more about this, but crazily enough, she starts getting force choked in the cell, like just randomly, and Ahsoka is like, no, wait. And meanwhile, Tarkin comes in, or at least after she's dead, Tarkin comes in, and they have a recording of this, but naturally there was no sound, so Ahsoka is immediately blamed for it, is brought into custody. Yeah, she is framed for the murder of Letta Turmond. But the framing doesn't end there. Later on, she finds a key card deposited outside her cell and thinks that Anakin is actually trying to help her get out, but nope. In fact, what happens when she gets out is she finds a bunch of clones wiped out and her lightsaber's there, and she is suddenly framed not just for killing Letta, but also for killing a bunch of clone troopers, and has to go on the run. And the clone troopers want to kill her, but Anakin arrives and says, nope, you're going to belay that order. She needs to be brought in alive. And they manage to chase her down eventually. She loses one of her lightsabers, her short lightsaber, in the midst of all the confrontations that happen through this. She gets to the end of a pipe system and Anakin corners her and says, no, you gotta come in and we'll sort this out. And she says, no, you're the only one who believes in me. You have to trust me. She jumps out the pipe and sails down, and it looks like where she's jumping out has to do with that place where you descend into the various levels of Coruscant, right? So she jumps out and she happens to catch a passing ship and is able to escape from the clone troopers and Anakin. And that's pretty much where things get left. It's very cliffhangery, but that's what happens with these 4-episode story arcs. It's cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger. And there is something, or a couple of things actually, that are fun inspirations for this episode, which I will point out for you after the break. Stay tuned. Hey Rebel Rouser, I've made some changes to the asteroid belt level at patreon.com/SW7X7, and they are all with sponsors in mind. So if you want to get the word out about your business, your product, your service to a dedicated Star Wars audience, then please check out patreon.com/SW7X7 and look for the asteroid belt level for details. Again, that's patreon.com/SW7X7. Welcome back. So, one of the things that Wikipedia notes is that the episode is entitled The Jedi Who Knew Too Much, and that's patterned after the Alfred Hitchcock film, The Man Who Knew Too Much. So, there's a very Hitchcockian element to it. And also, there's a very fugitive element to it. So, if you think of most recently, the Tommy Lee Jones Harrison Ford movie, The Fugitive, that version of The Fugitive, right? There are elements of this episode that echo what you saw in that movie there. Now, of course, Ahsoka doesn't say, I didn't do it, and it wasn't her wife anyway, right? And Anakin says, I don't care, right? That doesn't happen. But the notion of a big pipe system, and Ahsoka getting to the end of it and seeing this giant drop and then just throwing herself off the ledge, that's very Fugitive. And yeah, that's one of those interesting things, and the notion of Ahsoka being framed for these murders, just like Richard Kimble was framed for a murder as well. Yeah, so there was a very cool set of parallels happening there. And that is where we're going to stop, because that is the end of The Jedi Who Knew Too Much. And we will talk about the next episode on the next episode of the podcast here. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. And as always, may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.